Hello, this is Ryan Craig from Safe Software's Professional Services team. In this screencast, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about how to load data into Microsoft SQL Server using Fme Desktop. With Fme Desktop, Microsoft SQL Server users can more easily convert, transform, and load data into SQL Server. I will demonstrate two simple translations. The first translation will load a mapinfo tab file into SQL Server. The second will load a comma-separated value file into SQL Server. To achieve this, I'll use Fme Workbench. Fme Workbench is the authoring environment for translations run by Fme. First I choose our reader, mapinfo tab file, and then I choose our data, a city parks tab file. In the writer, I'll choose the Microsoft SQL Server Spatial writer. There are a number of parameters to set: the name of the server, name of the database, username and password. I'll use Windows authentication. I can also set the spatial type, geometry or geography, and the name of the spatial column. If I'll often use the same settings, I can save these as defaults. I'll hit OK, and now Fme will read the source file and create an initial translation script using the definition from the mapinfo tab file. So we'll read in the layer names, the attribute names, and the attribute types, and create a destination with the same settings. I can now run this translation, and the data will be translated and loaded into SQL Server. Once the data is loaded, I can open the data in the Fme Universal Viewer to confirm that the translation was in fact successful. Again, I choose our reader, and then I can choose which table I want to read in. In this case, it was City Parks. Here's our data, and we can see that it's been translated successfully. Now I'll do my translation with a comma-separated value file. I can find all the supported formats by going to the Formats gallery. The Fme SQL Server Loader Edition offers basic format support. In the Fme Desktop Microsoft SQL Server Edition, you have access to a broader range of formats for greater flexibility. My format's the comma-separated value file. I'll choose my data set, my address update CSV file. With most formats, it's worthwhile to double check the parameters, make sure that they are correct. I can also set my source coordinate system. For formats that are coordinate system aware, this is unnecessary. But for formats like a comma-separated value file, it's a good idea to set the source coordinate system, especially if you want to perform a coordinate system conversion. For my writer, I'll go out to Microsoft SQL Server. Again, I can double check my parameters. I may want to go out to a geography spatial column instead, and choose an appropriate destination coordinate system. Quite often with a database, the table which you'll want to write into already exists, so I can import that feature type definition. Now when I create the workspace, instead of using the layer names and attribute types from the existing data set, it'll instead prompt me for the table that contains these options in the actual database. I have an existing address points table, and I'll load the data into that. So now here's what I have, and here's what I want. My source data is non-spatial, so I'll use some transformers to transform the data to have the correct geometry. You may notice that some of the transformers are grayed out. The Fme SQL Server Loader Edition offers basic transformation capabilities. In the Fme Desktop Microsoft SQL Server Edition, you have access to a broader range of transformers for greater flexibility. I'll choose my 2D point replacer. I can then connect it up, set any necessary settings. My X value is Xcord, my Y value is y-coord. You may have noticed that some of these attributes are not being automatically mapped. It's because they have different names over here. So I can map street nam to street name and street typ to street type. Before running this translation, it's often a good idea to save your translations and review any parameters. There's 4 layers of parameters. There are workspace parameters that will affect how the translation is run. A useful one here is a destination redirect. I can redirect my output directly to the universal viewer, at which point it won't actually write out to the database. This is excellent for debugging or testing your translations. I also have the reader and writer parameters, which can be found here. Here I can set or change the server name, username, and things like the writer mode. I can insert features, update, or delete them at the writer level. I can also check parameters in the feature types, the layers, or tables here, which are the same options that I find here. I can change the name of the table, change attribute names and data types, and change individual parameters here as well. For example, I want to drop this table first. And then there's also format attributes that allow you to have individual features be written out differently. I can now run this translation. The data will be read in from my CSV file. It will be given geometry, and a coordinate system conversion will be performed before it's loaded into SQL Server Spatial. Thank you for watching this demonstration. For additional resources for SQL Server users, please go to www.safe.com/Microsoft. If you have any questions, please contact us at www.safe.com.